Hi, everybody. This is Deanna Kosaraju, the founder of Global Tech Women. Welcome to Voices 2015. This is version 3.0, our annual conference where we celebrate women in technology around the world, the week of International Women's Day. I'm really excited about this next session, Change IT or Change It, with Revi Sterling. I've known Revi for quite a while, and she is a force to be reckoned with around the world helping women in ICT. So a couple things you need to know about Spreecast. You can use the chat window over here on the right-hand side to ask questions. And I hope that you will do that because this is a very interesting topic. And also, I will be putting up a slide deck here. I'm going to go ahead and launch it right now. I think I'm going to launch it right now. There it goes. And so you can drag and drop this anywhere on the screen so you can watch our speaker as well as follow along with the slides. She's going to let us know what slide number she's on. And that way we can follow along here. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Revi.
Thank you very much. As Deanna said, we do go way back, and it's so much fun to be part of Voices this year. And thank you so much for people that are joining us from around the world. I hope you find this session, if not necessarily interesting right off the bat, maybe it plants a seed about some of the work that you can do as a technical woman or technical man to advance poverty alleviation strategies and human development efforts around the world. And so I'm starting off with slide 1 here, and that was, most of these are taken from fieldwork projects that I have worked on in the past. And this one is from the Napo River Valley down in Peru. And part of the fun of doing field work is, of course, being out in the field with deploying technologies for human want and need. But on this particular trip, I found out that parrots mostly have black tongues. So that is my factoid of the day. So I'm going to move on to slide 2. And there's a reason why I'm so drawn to this field and why more and more people seem to be interested in doing technology for humanitarian work. And that is because for so many people, yes, they have a big brain, and that's rewarded in high-tech companies all around the world or in startups. But a lot of people also have a huge heart that accompanies that big brain. And this is an opportunity to put the two of them together to truly have a lasting legacy and make the world a better place in some small or even in some cases big way. So this is mostly for those who have the big heart and big brain syndrome. And I'm not sure how big my brain is, but I'm pretty sure I have a pretty big heart, especially for my students. I started the only master's program in the U.S. in information and communication technologies for development. And we'll talk about the acronym and the sort of verbiage around this field in a few slides. But I wanted to jump right in and show some examples of the students and the student work that we have going around the world, from doing agricultural extension projects on mobile phones in Owerri, Nigeria, to doing distance education and water monitoring projects in Peru, based on a closed Wi-Fi network that we created, to doing maternal health monitoring on digital pens at Kenyatta Hospital in Kenya, and working on the technology policy angle. My student Rachel Strobel has been working a lot in Mexico and the U.S. to look at the role of technology in counter-human trafficking efforts. And has become, at her young age, a leader on the policy levels and international policy levels, having these kinds of conversations. And most of these students come from a technology background, and what they realized was that they loved the technology, but what they also wanted to do was try to help the communities that they cared about around the world advance even more quickly. And this slide, slide 4, shows just a sampling of some of the projects that students and I have worked on over the last 5 years that this program has been around. And it's been projects in agriculture and energy and community radio for gender equity and technology-based microfinance and lending platforms, looking at women in e-business in Peru and Ecuador and Colombia, looking at ICT and education following the Haiti earthquake. So we've had quite a bit going on over the last few years. My next slide is number 5. And the reason why this is so important is because, and this came straight from the New York Times this week on March 11th, is that 1/3 of all people in the world have connected to the internet. That's it, 1/3. And if you take a look around and just think, wow, maybe 2/3 of the people around me haven't, or what if I was one of those 2/3? It's kind of amazing to think about the knowledge and information and the networks of people, peers, and supporters that we wouldn't have if we weren't connected. So while most of humanity is moving into places that are covered by cellular and wireless networks and broadband connectivity, half the people in the world have never made a cell phone call, and 2/3 have never used the internet. And this is not just about, cat videos, and which I love. And I had my cat up here a few minutes ago, and she jumped down right before the video started. But this is about getting the very information that we need to do our jobs and be successful and stay in communication with our families and friends, especially if we live across continents. And when it comes to people that are making less than $2 a day, this is the kind of information that's critical to succeed. Where is the clean water going to be this week? When maybe does the World Food Program come by with a delivery if I'm in a refugee camp, etc. So people are missing out on very, very critical information. And if we talk about the old adage that information equals power, this lack of information access leads to systemic underempowerment. So this is slide 6, for the other 2/3 of people that are not on the internet right now, and I'm not saying that the internet is a solution to global poverty. It's certainly not. It's simply a tool that helps you get information from point A to point B in the same way that we use it. The people at the bottom, the so-called bottom of the pyramid, are also using it. So if we think about what that is, and the reason that the talk is called Change It, which is, of course, Change IT, we have the IT for development, human development, global development, community development field that has come out of computer science. At the same time, it's come out of international development studies and moved into its own interdisciplinary field. The rest of the world calls IT ICT. And so our field, because it's very global, is called ICT for development instead of just IT. But change ICT sounds kind of strange since we're changing IT, actually. And what I love about the C is that it stands for communication. And that is very key, because what are we doing information exchange for, and putting these telecommunication infrastructure in, and building devices and using things like TV white space and other advanced technologies, Google Loon balloons and drones, if we're actually not accomplishing communication. So I think that's a very key distinction. So the rest of the talk, you'll hear me talk about ICTD as a subfield. And what really is ICTD? Well, it's the software and hardware and services and policies to address some of the largest socioeconomic stressors of our times. And we can talk about that a little later, but at the last count, and this is about 3 years ago, a graduate student had discovered that there were 17,000 mobile help applications being deployed in the so-called developing world. So there's a lot of interest in this space, and most of it comes from computer scientists and information systems people who go, look, I have some great skills here, and I really care about the rise of diabetes in communities in Mexico, and I'm going to go do something about this via technology. So this talk is going to explore a little bit about what technology can do to help end poverty, and then close with a discussion on what you can do with your technical skills. And please ask questions, etc., because that's the only way this talk is going to be way more interesting than just having me up here yakking. Let's see. But I'll spend a little bit of time on slide 7 with some of the definitions. And everyone has a different definition of global development or international development. And that's great. The words that we use in the field of international development, things like development, sustainability, empowerment, these are very loose and lofty words that allow people to create their own definitions of them. For me, the idea of community international development is centered on the fact that we have currently a finite level of resources, and basically let's think of it as a pie. And no one actually wants to give up their slice of a pie to give someone else more pie, unless you're just really, really sweet. Maybe you're just one of those nice people. But for the most part, it's a redistribution effort. And if I have, everything that I want in my life, I don't necessarily want to make myself less endowed, happy, enabled, so that you will have internet connectivity. So what can we do via information communication technologies to actually enlarge the resource pool and grow the pie so that I don't have to give everything up for you to have some of your own? And I think that's an important key figure. And so why do we actually need something like information and communication technologies for development, or ICTD? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about things like the United Nations Millennium Development Goals, but the fact is that, around the world, because of such stressors as climate change and migration and fuel and food price fluxes and conflict, systemic gender inequities around the world, there's many places where actually the quality of life and the base state for being has declined over the last 20 years. Technology can also, and to go back to that point, the traditional development approaches, which would be to go in with an agriculture service or a gender equity issue service or a food security service or a water initiative. People are looking at these things and going, wait a minute, we've been doing international development for 70 years. How come the needle hasn't moved much farther? And this is where technology comes into play, because perhaps with technology, and we're seeing some of this, we can quantum leap, or at least leapfrog ahead and try very new initiatives using information communication technologies. ICT also ties other development efforts together. All of a sudden I can go from doing a mobile health network in one clinic in southern India, but because of a delay tolerant network or some other networking technologies I can use, I can maybe hook up 5 or 6 clinics. And when the doctor comes to one clinic, we can do some rudimentary telemedicine, not necessarily surgery, but visits with the doctor, clinical discussions, etc., and scale out resources that are very constrained in low-income communities. The other thing is that technology is coming, regardless if we bring it, from the West or not. I'm sure any of us that have traveled internationally are amazed by the proliferation of cell phones worldwide. I can be in a place that has no running water and no access to latrines and actually no electricity, and people have cell phones, and they've hooked them up to car batteries to recharge them, or maybe some academic researcher left a solar charger around and people are making some extra money by charging people's cell phones that way. People want technology. It's not just a status symbol, but it is. It's also a way of staying in touch and getting very critical development information. And the only problem with ICTD is that it has been I talked about that 17,000 mobile health applications. The problem is it's a very unregulated environment. And I'm not advocating for more regulation, but I am going to advocate for a more thoughtful approach to ICTD. Because what we do see a lot of are these very short-lived pilot projects that go into a community and deploy a tablet-based agriculture solution or a mobile health, cell phone-based call-in service. People get the data, and the researchers get the data, or the non-governmental organization gets a proof of concept, and then leaves and takes the technology with them. And then the community is left having experienced some access to information and then nothing at all. Or we put in projects, like several education projects that I've seen, where the laptops fail after 6 or 7 months because no one thought about how humidity and monitors interact. Or, as we've done many times in the United States with so many different education efforts, we bring in technology and don't train the trainers. We don't train the teachers. We don't talk to parents about what we're doing. And then you have a bunch of laptops sitting in the corner. And that certainly has happened. It's not just a U.S. phenomenon. I've seen that probably in every country I've been in. And then when we talk about ICTD, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, we're trying to figure out, what's the scale of information communication technologies for development? Because certainly it's infrastructure. It's having the towers and the power and the actual equipment itself. but it's also the digital content and services. It's having a microloan platform in your language, or it's having a user interface that's text-free and all symbol-based for people that are in low-literate populations. And then it's also that piece that always gets mishandled or ignored, as we talked about, which is the training piece, which is the digital kind of, capacity building and training in technology, so that people, when we leave as technologists, can pick up from there and move projects forward and be the people that actually can maintain systems and handle upgrades and teach other people when we leave. Let's see, I'm going to go to slide 8. I know word clouds are a little, circa 2009, but last night it just seemed fun to make a word cloud. But this talks a little bit about who's doing ICTD, which is pretty much everybody in technology, if you stop and think about it. Yes, of course, development agencies are running to technologists to say, we really need this. We realize that technology could be a huge boon to our efforts. But it's also technology companies. Most technology companies have a corporate and social responsibility arm that's very interested in trying to use technology to help communities advance. There's lots of non-governmental organizations and FBO's faith-based organizations like World Vision, United Catholic Relief Services, etc., that use a lot of technology in their programming. We talked about the private sector a little bit, trade associations like the World Economic Forum and the GSM Association, governments, absolutely. When we're talking about constrained resource environments, if you can't get a census taker or a land record manager or a voting official out to a community, can that be moved to technology, and how? And then certainly folks like me in academia, where we get to actually study and build a lot of ICT and then go and see how communities are interacting with it. So most of our funding in this space comes from foundations, and that'd be like the Gates Foundation and the National Science Foundation. At the same time, development agencies like the World Bank and USAID, people are very involved. World Bank, I think, has about 17 different ICTD kind of divisions within it. So it's a pretty big space. There's always, and there's always room for more people. Now, on slide 9, I just want to talk about the historical context of ICTD very briefly. I know these slides will be available, and this is a little wordy, but I would say that if I looked at ICTD as a field, and I think it's important to know where we've been to kind of help us predict where we're going and to make the smart choices, is that ICTD 1.0, we're talking maybe the late 90s, early 2000s time frame. This was very much an era of kind of unbridled enthusiasm for the role of technology. It was basically the idea that if poor people had technology, they would lift themselves out of poverty. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but for the most part, that's really what drove a lot of the interest in technology for development, which is, wait a minute, they don't have internet, they don't have PCs, they don't have phones. We're going to give it to them, and that woman who didn't have a cell phone yesterday that's an egg vendor is now going to be this egg entrepreneur because she's going to be able to open up to new markets and get pricing information and start a collective. And this was fun and good, and this was about the time when I started into ICTD myself, because what a heady space to be in. Here we're technologists, and now we've just been told that technology is going to solve the world's problems. This enthusiasm got a little tempered in the mid-2000s with a phase I'll call ICTD 2.0, which was much more the fact that maybe technology itself didn't actually end poverty, because none of us were seeing those results. What we were seeing is what Kentaro Toyama, who's one of our best researchers in the field, basically said, which is technology is an amplifier of human intent. So if you have someone that's already very business-minded or very academically motivated, that's what they're going to use technology for, is to bolster that interest already. But that giving someone just, a laptop for the sake of giving them a laptop wasn't necessarily going to change their lives. In fact, I saw a lot of development projects where people were given laptops and then they were finding out ways to sell them because having the money from those laptops was far more useful because they could do more beneficial things by selling the laptop that was, donated to them than just having it sit around and get dusty. So ICTD 2.0 was very much focused on working with other development sectors. And what I mean by that is like health and education and gender and civil services, as opposed to just saying, here's technology, now go lift yourself out of poverty. Now, I'd say that when kind of 2015 forward, we're seeing a lot of technology, advanced technologies being used in the developing space. Because we're at that point where it makes a lot of sense. And I think this is a great launching point because in the past, ICTD 1.0 for certain was all about doing things like laptop drives and cell phone drives, and basically giving people used equipment that wasn't necessarily in great shape. And ICTD 2.0, we're realizing a lot of people had mobile phones and we were going to leverage that infrastructure and ownership. In ICTD 2015 and beyond, now we're looking at the fact that, yes, there is much more technology proliferation in the developing world, but not only that, there's so much data. And now we're looking at roles for data sciences and data scientists and looking at open and big data and trying to put together the pieces to have more evidence-based development, be that with technology or through the use of technology. It's also where funding models have gotten more interesting, such as the use of crowdsourcing and the combination of joint funding by development agencies and high-tech companies. And there's also been, because there's been so many interesting open source platforms that have come out of ICTD 1.0 and 2.0, we're seeing a lot more product coming out from the so-called global south, which is the usual kind of developing nations core, that is actually being used here in the US and Europe. So it's a very interesting switch, and we'll talk about that a little bit, where because of things like all the incubation labs in Africa, they're creating their own hardware and tablets and internet generators. And people in the States are kind of going, ooh, I like that. I'm going to pick that up and use it. So it's become a much more even playing field. All right, I'm going to go to slide 10 and try to move it along a little bit. So we've talked mostly about ICTD 1.0, but I have some pictures that I want to talk to you about. I would say that the biggest thing with ICTD kind of 1.0 is the integration with the Millennium Development Goals. And these came out in 1999. With Kofi Annan at the head of the UN. And these are kind of 8 galvanizing normative development goals that basically every NGO and development agency could get behind and work towards these large these large socioeconomic issues. And of course, technology, this being that kind of era of unbridled enthusiasm, technologists, and these are just some of the titles of papers that came out at this time, were all about how technology can help us achieve the Millennium Development Goals. I just want to kind of keep that in mind as context as we go through. But you can see that enthusiasm in the paper titles. So on slide 12, what we're seeing, as I talked about, this technology as panacea phase, were studies that basically showed that if you had increases of penetration in both the mobile broadband and fixed broadband market, you'd actually see higher economic growth in communities and countries where these technologies were being deployed. And this was great because you go, this is actually an economic development strategy. What we didn't have in here is some of the background on, is this equitable development or not? And is everyone benefiting from this? Are women, our children, our marginalized tribes, etc. So let's say slide 13, just a very common picture of going through a lot of communities. It seems like every community, pardon me, I'm going to blow my nose real fast. Sorry about the interruption. So about every community had an internet cafe in it. Here we have the real internet. I think this is in Ethiopia, where you go and check your mail. And there were a lot of programs by Cisco and Microsoft and Intel and others to teach people digital literacy skills, so and still are. A lot of telecenters popped up during the ICTD 1.0 phase, where people would come and learn some digital literacy skills that then they could pass along. And of course, we had the famous One Laptop Per Child initiative, which was going to somehow revolutionize all the children of the world. They were going to self-learn differential equations and Hindi by this one little laptop. I have one of these. I have never learned differential equations, but maybe that's more about me and less about the laptop. And this laptop was really meant to be that under $100 laptop. Lots of people got behind the sort of buy one, give one campaign that went on with this. And One Laptop Per Child is a certainly very interesting case study in development to see where it's worked and why, and where it's failed and why. And I can certainly get into that into the questions or point people to literature about that. But that's one of the things that people usually associate ICTD with, is the One Laptop Per Child initiative. In ICTD 2.0, this is much more the era, of course, of cell phones and these kind of trucks. This is one from Nairobi. SMS till you drop. Okay, I think we've all figured that out. We are all dropping daily as we, SMS all the time. But this is where, cell phones were dropping in prices, and people were doing a lot of SMS-based programs. I remember one time working on analyzing 5 or 6 different agricultural price systems that were SMS-based in Zambia and Zimbabwe. But none of these programs had any kind of interoperability. They weren't sharing market data. Everyone just wanted their app out there. It's a very high-tech ethos. I'm going to create something better and I'm going to put it out in the marketplace. And I'm a little critical of that approach, and we'll talk about that. But there were ads like this that really sort of fetishized the use of computing with more marginalized tribes like the Maasai. There's a picture down below that I took a few summers ago, where 2 out of 3 Maasai who have cell phones are smiling. I think that's our takeaway on that. So, just kidding. But a lot of this was, slide 19, driven by the expansion of undersea cables around all sorts. That this is just a tiny slice of the map. But because I do most of my work in programs in Africa, I think it's fascinating to see that in 2008, we didn't have undersea cables for the most part going around Africa. And in 2014, those are some pretty big pipes. And these connections are moving, these wires are moving inland, to landlocked communities and countries. And on slide 20, just a few pictures of kind of your average cell phone. We're not talking a ton of smartphones in the market at this point, even though the prices have gotten down to about $60 for a brand new smartphone in East Africa. But this does show things like Facebook Zero, which is the text-based version of Facebook. So you don't have to have a smartphone to post to Facebook and see people's responses, and accounts. Here's FoodNet, which is one of the many agricultural pricing services programs that's out there. And then a very typical feature phone, probably found on the used market, etc. And this is what we're really developing for. Let's see. And while we're developing, this is slide number 21, we're going a little crazy with development. There have been so many, as we talked about, so many pilot projects, and here's a sampling of some of the mobile health projects in Uganda, and you see that everyone's involved with them. Gates Foundation, UNICEF, World Food Program, the World Health Organization, Mary Stopes International, etc., that actually Uganda, Zambia, Rwanda, and South Africa created a moratorium for any new mobile health applications coming into their markets until we got together as the technologists and found ways of working together and producing opportunities for interoperability and exchange with the national health systems, etc. Because otherwise we were going in really as sort of technology vigilantes, and not paying much attention to what the sustainability and long-term usability of these systems were. So I think it's pretty smart that you have countries now that can stand up and say, this is great, and you need to get your story straight before you come in. We're not a high tech, we're not a typical marketplace where, may the best app win. It needs to be a smart app, and it needs to focus on connectivity with the other applications and databases and patient record portals and everything else that a country has. So in slide 22, this is just sort of my end of ICT 2D 2.0 reality check, that we have to keep thinking about the down market approaches to technology, even as things like smartphones and incubators and these undersea cable pipes continue to expand, which is still the fact that in Africa about 50% of the rural population is covered by cell phone service. This is increasing as more people want cell phone service, but it's still about 50%. The fact that on the content side, language and literacy levels around the world vary greatly, which doesn't mean that an illiterate person can't use numbers. Illiterate people are often numerate, and numbers are easy to recognize. But 50 million of the illiterate, the 3.4 million people, billion people around the world that are illiterate are women. And we need to take that into account, especially if we're trying to build technologies that specifically focus women and their empowerment. And that would be things like different types of text-free user interfaces and symbol-based communications, etc. Because if I get a text and I can't read it, it's not very valuable to me. And we shouldn't cut people out of communication. And then there's still, a major cost differential between the developing world and the developed world. If I look at the fact that 31% of my paycheck would go towards connectivity here in the States, if I lived elsewhere, I would probably use the internet and my phone a lot differently. So there's a lot to be done on the price and pricing and policy models, so that we're not outpricing technology and actually turning it into a tax, on the poor. And this goes back to the literacy issue. If I am, an illiterate or low literate human, and I am trying to contact somebody, I'm going to call them probably. And voice calls over text is maybe 4 to 10 times more expensive, depending on your market. So talking a little bit about on slide 23 about gendered issues, and what I should have done is update this slide because we have some good news. The GSMA, the GSM Association, just had their Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, and in 2011, the gap between men and women using cell phones around the world was 25%. Now it's down to 18%. So we are making some great progress. But we still need to look at the fact that there's some major gendered gaps, especially in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, with women's cell phone use and mobile internet use, because that is how most women and most people are actually accessing the internet. It's not through a computer or a tablet or a telecenter. It's through a mobile internet option on a phone. Let's see. Slide 24. So where are we actually going? Well, the Millennium Development Goals, because we didn't quite achieve them, I think we did in places like Sweden and Finland, although a lot of countries did make, rapid strides towards them, especially places like Rwanda, is to look at something, that the United Nations, other large development agencies and multilateral agencies are looking at, which is sort of the next UN Millennium Development Goals, which is called the Post-25 Framework. That's informally what it's being called. They're going to be called the Sustainable Development Goals, and they're still under deliberation. There's going to be 12 of them, or 17 of them, or 9 of them, but at this current time, this is the snapshot of what the Sustainable Development Goals will be like worldwide. And we'll have to see if there's that same sort of enthusiasm when they're announced at the UN General Assembly in September around where really is the use of technology to help bolster up each of these individual goals. So I do think that this is it's a good set of goals because it actually moves up empowering girls and women from number 3 to number 2, which I realize that's a small move, but we'll take it. All right, so slide 26. So this is sort of, where I'd like to ask people where they identify themselves as having a role in information and communication technologies for development. Because what I've tried to do is capture all the different levels, and this is not, a fully inclusive set, but where are the activities in ICTD happening? Are they happening at the grassroots level? Are they happening at the national and international policy arenas? Um, are they happening at an infrastructure or services side? So I've tried to show here a little bit of a spectrum in terms of what kinds of technologies, issues, organizations, and initiatives are happening from everything from the citizen-led ICTD level to the international policy level. And I'm showing this slide because I'm interested in people finding where they belong on here or where they might want to work. And then from there, that helps create a roadmap for what kinds of projects you could participate in, or if this means a career change from Qualcomm to the ITU, or from academia to an NGO, or wherever you think that that ICTD, the most promising place, is going. Let's see, move ahead to 27. Because what I am most excited about, we talked a little bit about the idea or the concept that organizations and technologists in the global south are creating technologies now that are being used by the Atlanta Police Department or by community activism groups here in the States, here in Denver, Colorado, is that we're really getting to a point where you're no longer seeing poor people, quote unquote, as beneficiaries of our technology, but with things like human-centered design and just the forces of globalization making everything smaller and closer together, and you can see what other people have that you don't have. More of a design, more of a demand-driven form of technology for development. And what I mean by that is up until ICTD 2015 or so, it's been a lot of us kind of going, I'm at my desk and poverty is bad and I'm a technologist and I'm going to build an app for poverty. Or I'm going to do something around this. I went to India last year and I was horrified by the amount of pollution from little rickshaws. So I'm going to build a sensor network and we're going to put them on the back of every rickshaw and have a cloud-based environmental tracking application, etc. Which would be fine, except that perhaps, we don't have to buy in necessarily from the rickshaw organizations to put these on each rickshaw. And we're not sure that India would actually, that the local government would do anything about this data if we did provide it. So instead of coming in with this supply side development model, which is all about, I'm an American technologist with really great ideas, I'm going to go do them. It's much more a nuanced response of what are communities and people asking for, and I'm not going to treat them as beneficiaries, but as actual technology customers, and I'm going to listen and create, and in many cases co-create with them what, through rapid prototyping, etc., a service or application or policy that actually makes the most sense and has some sort of long-term vision and sustainability and cost structure that makes sense for this community. So let's move to slide 28. And this is where I think some of the exciting stuff really is when we talked about leapfrogging and the fact that, that now we're looking at high-tech technologies in these communities as opposed to hand-me-down laptops and cell phones, is that I kind of break this leapfrogging down into the things that say, hey, actually, real computer science and real computer engineering is being done to address development issues and is being done in the global south. Much more so sometimes than here in the U.S. And that's because there is, and there's sort of a flip side to that. That's because there is less technology regulation in a lot of places. If I wanted to go put up a network right here in Colorado, communications network, there are some carriers that would not be amused by that, and I'd probably break a few laws. However, if I want to go run white space trials in Namibia, and the government says, okay, I can go do that. So if we look at, and most of that brings back to kind of networking and connectivity, because there's such interesting network and connectivity constraints when working in places that have the climates and the dust and the remoteness and the weather that a lot of places in developing countries have. There's been some really interesting research around using TV white space, around using things like Google Loon, which is the balloon that does that provides Wi-Fi connectivity, around using unmanned aerial vehicles, especially in places, in Ebola-struck communities where health workers, there may not be enough of them to go into remote communities. And we've seen some hostile response with people going into remote communities. But a drone could go in with a shipment of rubber gloves and a pre-recorded device that gives instructions on how to do safer and more hygienic burials to keep Ebola infections at a lower rate. And as more and more technologies and devices come online, we start looking at the fact that many developing regions and developing countries are looking right at not using IPv4 at all and going right to IPv6, because they're worried that if they go to IPv4, with the proliferation of the Internet of Things and all of these Internet addressable devices, we're going to run out of addresses more soon. So Bhutan is the first IPv6 fully compliant country, which is interesting. Bhutan, okay. A few years ago, Bhutan didn't even have televisions. Energy issues are also huge, because if you don't have a grid, you certainly don't have technologies that are running off of the grid. And so we're seeing a lot of cell phone and light charging hybrids, a lot of microgrids that don't necessarily rely on a national energy grid system to work. On the big data side, this is very exciting, because this is where we actually can see not only is our technology for development project working, but if I put in remote sensing and monitoring equipment onto my cook stove or my water filter or my solar cooker, can I actually, as part of that Internet of Things network, can I actually get data back about how my development project is working? Is it efficient? Is it not? So some pretty exciting things just on the computer science and computer engineering side of the house. In slide 29, this is not going to turn out well because it's so small, so I have the URL underneath it. This is from Tim Kelly at the World Bank, who's an ICT, one of our best ICTD researchers and policy makers. This just shows, we talked a little bit about the iHubs and incubation spots in Africa, but this shows how many countries have these development spaces and these development labs that are sort of open and kind of that hub model that we see in major cities in the United States, where people can come in and actually create mobile applications and server apps and hardware and prototypes, because people that are in a country are going to understand the needs of their rural family members and community members far better than I'm ever going to understand, even if I do live there. And there's just really high quality projects coming out of the hubs. So what about looking ahead? What are we going to do about this? I'm looking up an elephant's nose in this picture, which is looking ahead. The biggest thing that I would say to technologists is get to know this arena called global development. Because the biggest issue I have with my students coming in, and why we end up teaching global development courses, is they don't understand that there is this industry called international development, and it's been around since since the close of World War II. That there's been all sorts of policies and institutions and theories and leaders and pundits that really, really affect how development is done at the country and regional level. And so I would, as I would start myself, starting with Wikipedia under international development, getting a few books that talk about introduction to international development. Nothing too weighty. I don't think you don't need to be an international development expert to do ICTD, but you need to be cognizant and aware of the space. There's some organizations I've listed here that I think are really good starts, like the Center for Global Development or the Institute for Development Studies. And then, what I do is I just set my browser to the global development news page of the Guardian, a UK-based newspaper every day. Wonderful, really great information every day about what's happening around the world. And then the biggest thing I have is that, most people read exactly one expert in the international development space. They will read someone like Jeffrey Sachs, the author of, Out of Poverty, and they'll read someone like Bill Easterly, who wrote The White Man's Burden, and they'll go, oh, I totally understand it now. And these are just pundits. These are people who have a very, specific viewpoint on international development, and you need to make sure you know the counter arguments. So we can talk, offline about this, but as soon as you're drawn into the international development space, you'll start to hear some names and be able to put people in different camps, and you just want to make sure you've read, enough from the smattering of camps so that you're not leaving out certain perspectives. Let's see. More importantly, probably on slide 32 is get to know ICTD. What I would say is don't start with Wikipedia. It's a very strange entry in Wikipedia for our field. It's very incomplete and probably needs some work, and something that maybe my students and I should take on, but not this week. But I am listing a few websites and blogs that I think are great starting points. The other thing is that we do most things in Twitter. And people roll their eyes and go, oh, I don't want to install, I don't like Twitter. Except when people are out in the field and doing field projects, connectivity constraints or cost or just time is such that people send these little, Twitter messages about links to projects and papers and that kind of stuff, and it's easy to get and it's easy to push to the field, as you've got SMS capabilities on most phones. So most of ICTD is actually done and recorded in Twitter. That's not to say that we don't have a journal. We do. It's called ITID, which is Information Technology for International Development, and it's a free and open source journal, peer-reviewed, probably our most prestigious journal from the MIT Press. And we also have a Tier 1 ACM conference that happens every 18 months. The next one will be in Singapore in 2015 in May, if anyone wants to jump over to Singapore. So on slide 33, I want to talk a little bit about the kind of needs that ICTD has, because yes, we need people that have the big brain and the big heart, but what has to go on in that brain to be useful in this field? And I would say pretty much every technology is needed, is necessary. If I go back, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back one more slide to slide 32. There's a great list of jobs, the ICT for D jobs, run by Wei and Voda, who actually keeps kind of the running catalog of ICTD available jobs, so you can see what is out there and what kind of skills are required. So back to, or desired, back to slide 33. The things that come, that I hear all the time from non-governmental organizations and foundations and development agencies and think tanks are, of course, people that have these skills that are listed here. These are certainly the top big ones. But I would say also, just in the last 2 months, the second to last bullets are just the bullet points are requests I've gotten for students who have embedded systems expertise or educational software or database design expertise or experience with security. So anything you can think of, we actually really need it in technology, because most technology for development, because most of international development is staffed with people with international development degrees. My big thing, and this is why I want you to know a little bit about global development before jumping in, is that all these people, all these skills, you may have these, but please have a sense of context and culture that comes from knowing something about international development, or you're just not going to be, as useful and get the bang, for the buck or the heartbeat or the brainwaves. So, yeah. And then on slide 34, I want to close before questions with just, a little flip on the equation, which ICTD is actually really perfect for people with the big heart and the big head, because it enables you to combine both and make lasting contributions to people's empowerment. be that in your backyard or be that halfway around the world. And it's a growing space. And as we showed with the stakeholders, it seems like every sector involved in development or technology has an ICTD arm or interest. We could certainly use some more master's programs and undergraduate programs around the world if you plan on starting any. And this is a space that needs you. So please jump in. I'm leaving you my email address. You could email me at any time, any questions about this, any debates that you want to have offline, as well as a link to my website that shows more about our student projects. That's it.
What a great talk. I think that it's so interesting to see all of the various pieces that are happening across the world, but also a little concerning. A couple things that you said make me ask the question. So you gave the example of all of these health-related apps that are being run in certain countries in Africa and how there's a moratorium on further applications, which is completely understandable. But it makes me wonder, is there some kind of a center or data center where all of these different applications are being tracked for whether or not they're being useful so that people can, like you said, learn what's working and what is not working and how these could be best deployed in other places in the world?
No, there isn't, and I would say that probably every conference I've ever been to says we need a database, we need a central clearinghouse of these things. People have tried. I give great kudos to the many organizations that have tried, except that, as you know, having anything static that tries to track initiatives that are out in the real world, you never know when it's broken, when it's online. I mean, it's been an impossibility. What I will say is that even though in global development itself is a pretty large and hard to track field, there aren't that many people in ICT for development. We tend to circulate around a few conferences. For the most part, we know each other pretty well, if not personally, at least by Twitter. And that is how kind of the informal information gets out about what's working and what's not. That's not a great answer. What I will say that's a little more encouraging is that funders are being a lot more demanding of what the monitoring and evaluation plans will be for projects, about what the scalability and long-term total cost of ownership of these projects will be. So if I look at things like grand challenges that come out of the Gates Foundation or DIV grants from USAID, they're requiring a much more thoughtful level of project design than just, hey, I'm going to go do a cool, maternal, tracking app. And I think, as the development industry moves more and more towards, evidence-based, projects and evidence-based research, that is also going to affect how ICTD is done. The other thing that I will say is that every once in a while, about once a year, the World Bank holds what's called a fail fair. And it's sort of this black box event that people go to in terms of you're not allowed to tweet about it or write about who you see. And it's meant to be a very open, candid discussion about how people fail in ICTD and why projects fail. And, the idea originally was, okay, this is scary. We can't talk about failures because if we say we failed, we'll never get donor funding again. Well, donors are also interested in trying to understand what works and what doesn't. And fail fairs are pretty important because it gives people a chance to basically say, actually, this app ended up costing $26,000 per person. Oh, okay, well, that's kind of crazy. Or we did this laptop deployment and half of the screens were broken or weren't working within 4 months. Wow, let's not do that ourselves. Because no one wants to go into community and have a failure. Obviously, not only does it look badly on you, but we're dealing with lives and livelihoods. And failing at that kind of level can really expose people and really make people's lives worse, which is not what we're trying to do with ICT for development.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's interesting. Well, at least having the discussion about failures is allowing people to understand where they could potentially add value and fix what it is that is failing. So, if you
Absolutely.
have hardware specialists at these events, it's too bad they kind of close the doors and don't make it more public, because I think a lot of the experts won't be in that room and could potentially solve that problem. If it's behind closed doors like that, I think some of the brightest minds that could resolve it are not there.
I think that's a
I
good
can
point.
understand.
I mean, we need it for that
Yeah.
to have that level of candidacy, candidacy on in terms of people being comfortable enough to say, "Oh my God, I failed, but I don't want my funder to know." But because it's a small community, believe me, it gets out. So,
Okay.
in fact, I was at a fail fair once talking about a failed project of mine, and someone didn't realize that, like, there was sort of the Chatham House rules or whatever those are, and I it came up on a Google search like Revi Sterling's failure. Like, okay, well, sure, let it
Oh
out.
no.
It's out there. So
Okay.
word gets
Okay.
out. It's a small community.
Okay. The second question I had for you was in regards to hackathons. So um, I see an opportunity for a lot of people, who have jobs during the day who want to contribute. A lot of them are now contributing to these hackathons for social good. They work on different types of projects. Also, India had, I think it's the largest hackathon for women ever in India this past weekend. So I'm curious about that as well. And from your angle, do you see a lot of work being done in different parts of the world where women are getting together and solving some of the challenges that they're facing personally through these hackathons? Or how do you see that working in terms of ICTD development?
Well, hackathons are interesting because I think the whole idea of hacktivism is, something to, that should somehow be embraced because, people really do have that heart and desire to do something, and maybe they can't in their day job, or they're finishing up their PhD and they're like, I care about this, but I can't care about it full time yet. Um, Now, that said, I have a beef with most hackathons. And sometimes and some I don't, but I think they're getting better. But most of the hackathons I've seen in the development space, which might be apps for for water pricing or this kind of stuff, they have no context surrounding them. So I've walked into a few hackathons where, and unfortunately, in the States, the hackathons have seemed very male oriented. I've rarely seen women at the hackathons at universities that I've gone to. A few, and maybe that's representative of just the pipeline, issue in general. But the hackathon is sort of like, here's the problem, now go be creative and build, and that's fine. Except here's where we run into problems. If we ever actually want to think that this is going to be useful, chances are these people have not spent time in Kibera slum in Kenya, or have been in the Central Plateau in Haiti, or places where they're building, where they're doing hackathons for, and thus they have no context. And if we brought those apps to people, they'd be like, God, this person's never been here. They don't know me. They don't know my life. My requirements aren't taken into consideration. So I think that hackathons have to have somebody there to help basically say, here's the 30 minutes of reading we're going to do ahead of time, or at least here's the stats, the development stats, the geography, the literacy rates, the power grid. This is the context within you're actually designing. And that would be hugely helpful. And some hackathons have been good about that. The other thing that I worry about is when development agencies hold hackathons as sort of outsourcing the development work and the technical development work. Hey, this is an easy, cheap way to get computer scientists to build us an app. And global development people are not exactly in the right, they don't have the background to actually look through the code and say, wow, this is good, or this is crappy, or this is going to crash. Or this is extensible. So I think more thought has to go into hackathons. One, certainly about the quality bar, because if I build an app, that's around people finding in rubble after a major disaster, and it sometimes works, that's a problem. and if the
Yeah.
Red Cross is going to pick that up and run with it, oh, the developer said it worked beautifully. So I think that the quality assurance the QA needs to go up on hackathons that are meant for any sort of real world deployment. And people doing the hackathons and being participants need to demand a better set of requirements so that they understand what they're coding for. When it comes to kind of women's participation in these, I see much more female participation at like the K Lab in Rwanda or the I Lab in Nairobi, or places where there is a native population of female technologists, and they're in a much better position to be like, yeah, I know. I was just back home last week, or I live next to that slum, or that's where I grew up, or that's where, they know the context a lot better. Not all the time, but they know the context a lot better. And what I see also are a lot more women at hackathons internationally than I do in the U.S. Because we may have that kind of geek stigma still, but in the pipeline, a hacker is a guy, and they do X, Y, and Z. And overseas, what I mostly see is this is just another opportunity for me to become, a richer technical, technically richer, woman in computing. And technology, for the most part, is seen as having a tech career is really a valuable and desired thing, as opposed to something that women shy away from. I mean, I think we definitely have that kind of international, which from working, all your work in India. There's definitely a schism about the discourses of what it means to be a woman in technology.
Well, and the reason I brought that one up in particular is I was really annoyed last year when in India, they've had these very public displays of anger over the sexual assaults that have been going on. And they're just very disturbing. And so the way that some people decided to address it was to have these hackathons where it was entirely men building these safety apps for women.
Oh,
And
I have a slide. I have an actual slide deck about this, Deanna. We could talk about this. Yeah.
oh, I couldn't believe it. And so I was hoping that this hackathon over the weekend would tackle that issue. I think that a women's hackathon is much more probable of offering some ways to mitigate some of the safety issues. However, I haven't been able to find a lot of detail about the hackathon, and after this conference is over, I'm gonna definitely look at that. But
Do we have
I
time to talk
truly
about
believe,
that for a second?
yeah, I do. Actually, we do. We have time. So yeah,
Okay.
let's talk about it.
Because what I think was really fascinating, and I actually, was going to put some slides in about women's safety apps, and then I took them out because I was worried about time, and as you can tell, I'm very verbose. But what I did think was interesting about that one that won last year, the She device, the Society
Yeah,
Harnessing Equipment. First of all, the name,
yeah,
Society Harnessing Equipment. Here is this
yeah,
yoke
exactly.
of wires that I'm supposed to wear in my brassiere that shocks a man, and SMSs and texts my circles.
Yes, my relatives.
Yes, what I'm so shocked about is, why is the onus for not getting raped and attacked on women? And does that mean that we are designing for women, or are we designing for an attacker? And there's a very different ethical thing there. We're designing,
Yeah.
and it's very uncomfortable to think that all rapes also start at the chest. That I need to have, equal pressure on, I need to have pressure on this. What if I'm attacked from behind? What if I'm on the ground? And I just thought, this is, again, that's where the big heart and the big brain need the context.
Right.
And I think that
Right.
when you think of things right now in the U.S. that have come out because there's so much more attention now on sexual assaults at universities, and I'm thinking, how is this brand new news? I mean, but like the cuff.io, where it's actually a really
Yeah.
pretty looking bracelet. Like, maybe that's more useful, or I think, was it Virginia Tech or UVA? I'll get in trouble for whichever one I didn't say. Has the nail polish that if you dip it in your drink, it'll turn colors to show. I mean, I don't know. I think this whole idea about technology for women's safety is interesting because it is technology itself going to make women more safe? That makes me very nervous that we're going to leave it to technology. Where's the technology that doesn't let a man, that shocks a man if he has a rapist thought? Yeah, I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yep. Yep.
What are your thoughts on this?
I just find the whole I just I've been following this as well, and I get more and more disturbed when I read, and these things are coming out daily. I mean, I'm reading them, they come in my Google search email every morning, and they just become more and more outrageous about how we're addressing those issues. And then on top of that, they're being built by men. I'm blown away.
And maybe because men are, often the perpetrators of this, that's okay. Maybe they're the right ones to build it, but are these men that are building it? They're probably not. Do we need to get into how much do we need to get in the mind of someone that does this versus having much better policies on campus and emergency buttons everywhere?
Exactly.
I don't know.
Well,
It's a very upsetting. I'm upset that I don't have a better answer for it, but it's just crazy.
well, here's another example. The other issue that's been annoying the heck out of me is the whole Uber thing. With the fact that there was a sexual assault of a woman who was in an Uber car, and so Uber's response to that is, well, and they made a big deal about this at the UN. Oh, well, we're gonna hire 1 million female drivers, but you're not gonna be able to request the drivers. And on top of that, we're building a safety app for women, so if they're having a problem in an Uber car, that it will immediately text people to send help. I mean, come on. Yeah.
Yeah,
So there's just a lot of
it's pretty
bad
wild.
technology happening. Yeah.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is why I was really happy that you're doing this session, because I think, more women have to be involved in this conversation. I think a lot of the craziness that's happening out there, um, we'll get some context and hopefully some realization about how things should be done, and how things should not be done,
Well, and I would
so that we
love,
can.
love, love to talk to, any interested participants, men, women. I saw a little alien icon come up when we were watching this precast. Someone had an alien for a profile picture. So aliens, about this idea of technology and women's safety. I don't have any great ideas, but it's a conversation I would love to keep having and maybe move to a larger venue. And if it could come out of Voices, that would be great.
That's a really good idea. We should do some kind of like global summit on women's safety, and just
Absolutely.
have a conversation about it. I would love that. Let's
We
do
could
that.
all wear she devices and see how comfortable they are.
Here, touch me. See what happens. Oh God.
All right, we digress. We should stop.
We better stop this thing. All right, Revi, as usual, it's amazing. Thank you so much for
Thank you so
taking
much.
this on.
Have a great rest of Voices. Happy International Women's Week, everybody.
Thank you. You too. All right, take
Bye.
care, everybody.